Before I start the video, I would like to announce that I will now be streaming paid access games on my Twitch channel, which can be found in the description of this video, so be sure to give it a follow for updates on my stream. Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is the Block Review with the first episode of my new series studying the Roblox genre, where I grab popular and well-known genres that are mostly or mainly used in Roblox games in particular, and talk about what they are, what could be better, and various ways of tackling this genre. Or at least the more preferred way, perhaps. Since this is the first episode, I want to start off with a big Roblox genre that is both popular and notorious. This being, if you read the title, the murder genre. But before we talk about the genre itself, we have to understand what the genre is. The murder genre consists of three roles: innocent, murderer, and sheriff. The sheriff has a gun and must eliminate the murderer, while the murderer has a knife and must kill all players in the game. And well, the innocent just walks around hoping not to die. When the murder genre first released, we had a lot of mixed opinions of these games. One of the biggest arguments is the fact that the game was stripped from a Gmod custom game known as Murder, and was considered a stolen idea, which it was. There were some games, however, that had a few unique add-ons like Mad Murderer and Twisted Murderer, which added murderer abilities, knife skins, and could be played in the third-person view, rather than the first-person view like the original Murder game.
What do I want to... No, what? No, what an odd request! That's it. Ah!
They also had game modes so that it wouldn't be too repetitive for certain players. These games eventually died off, and now in 2017, Murder Mystery 2 is one of the most everlasting front-page murder games on Roblox. The game has had a lot of negatives and positives talked about it. Players have said that it was repetitive, had overwhelming monetizations, and was ruined by toys and radios. But other players have also said that it was addicting, had no pay-to-win system since everything was purely cosmetic, or at least mostly, and had an optional first-person view mode. For me, personally, I thought it was okay. A good pass in the Roblox area, but not the type of game I'd spend hours upon hours of playing, but rather a game I'd play with a group of friends for a fun time and a few good laughs. But the biggest concern and problem from players who preferred the Garry's Mod version of Murder often had the same complaint that I considered an interesting reason for players not liking Murder Mystery. That being, deceptive gameplay. Fabric user and Roblox game developer Zeekers commented that the murderer had to be sneaky and deceptive, and that the game devolved into a game where the murderer just goes crazy from the start while all players just have to run away. Now, I don't expect Murder Mystery 2 to change the way it's played, since the game is a success just the way it is. But what about anyone who wants to make an actual murder game or experience an actual murder game that requires deceptive gameplay? Well, first, we have to ask the question, what makes the murder game a game that requires you to think before you take action? What can we learn from the murder game's flaws and pros to make a deceptive murder game of our own? Well, for further study, I took the time to download and record Garry's Mod in order to play the murder game mode for myself, and here's a list of things that came together: design, risk, exposure, and consequence, the last one being the most important. So in Zeker's review, he described the Murder Mystery 2 design as complex and somewhat claustrophobic, containing small areas and making it more difficult to get a clear shot as a sheriff. And in Gmod's Murder, it seems that the same thing is used, except with a bit more variety. Now, Gmod's Murder had a lot of awful maps. Thankfully, I was able to narrow down what made a good map by piecing together some bits and pairs here and there. In Garry's Mod Murder, maps that were the most fun favored both the killer and the gunman. The fun maps had a lot of dead ends, a few open areas, and a ton of small rooms, along with a variation of multiple paths to said open area. Obviously, you're thinking that players would spend more time in the open areas in order to get a clear shot and see where the murderer is and be able to escape beforehand. Well, this is when the next label comes in, risk. Naturally, players would usually want to be in these open areas, but for the most part, I actually had players that were venturing around the map instead. This is because the game has clues. Clues in the game are scattered around the map. If you get 5 of them, you are given a gun. You increase the danger for the murderer since now he has 2 guns to worry about. Now, in Murder Mystery 2, to get the players to venture around, instead they have coins, and the coins play out more as currency for getting crates for new skins. But this clue system also helps the murderer. It makes up for a good way to lure players, but at the end of the day, it's the player's decision to take that risk. Sure, open areas are a good way to keep the murderer out, but keep in mind that you need designs and mechanics that can give the murderer an opening. Otherwise, the murderer will have no way to kill everyone without getting caught. However, if a murderer picks up a clue, they can use their clue on a dead body and take its identity. You will be given the same model, the same name, and even the same colored text as the dead body it's used on. But that doesn't mean players can't just find the dead body and realize that the player with the same identity as the dead body could be the murderer. This system exposes the player if he happens to mess it up. To truly be exposed, however, a player has to have seen you pull a knife out, or notice you are cloned as one of the dead bodies. If you want, you can always pull your knife out and kill everybody, but as we established, we have consequences. If the murderer figures out who the sheriff is, he can easily kill him and camp the gun to make sure no one gets it. But remember, the players can always go elsewhere and find clues, and since the murderer isn't picking up the gun and camping by it, they obviously know who to shoot. The player could always knife throw multiple enemies while taking cover from the sheriff, but in the murder game it's different. If you throw your knife, you have to pick it back up. This means that throwing your knife is a risk. At the end of all this, consequence is the main key for having a good stealth game. Having a deception game where a player can kill at any time and anywhere will equal a terrible sneaking game. Because it means that if the player plays the game the way it wasn't intended to be played, then nothing happens. Because there are no restrictions, or rather, in Murder Mystery 2, not enough restrictions. As we went over the other labels, design, risk, exposure, they all add up to consequence. Consequence is the big label to this whole thing. If a murderer kills in an area that is wide open, he is an easy target to shoot. If a murderer camps the sheriff gun, he will risk getting himself killed and expose himself as the murderer. If the murderer isn't too careful, people might get suspicious of him. But in Murder Mystery 2, the only real restriction is if the sheriff has a clean shot and sees you with the knife. But nothing stops the killer from camping the gun. There aren't many open areas, so the place where you murder people won't matter. Nothing stops you from making cover behind a wall and throwing your knife at the sheriff multiple times, because you'll always have another knife to throw. See, to be a deception game, you have to do things in the game that will force the player to play the way you want them to play. Restrictions can be made by adding rules to broken mechanics, or adding mechanics to counter other mechanics. Now, I don't think any murder game should just make a blatant copy of the Gmod version. I don't want a murder game to play exactly like the Gmod murder. I don't want a game to have exactly all these restrictions just like Gmod murder. See, I appreciate that Gmod Murder and Murder Mystery 2 have many distinct features that offer very different playstyles, but it'd be nice to get a murder game that followed these labels without completely copying the original. We technically have deception games that have these features. Framed, for example, a game that I reviewed, has all of these labels. There are vantage points and small rooms designed to secretly kill your target. You can risk killing your target around police, and they might expose you. Your target might realize you're his hunter because you keep watching and waiting for the cop to leave. And if you're caught by him or the police, you can be killed. However, that game doesn't follow the traditional murderer roles or formula, consisting of an unknown killer who is hunting everyone in game, and an unknown shooter who is trying to figure out who the killer is. And while we do technically have games designed that way, all of them basically play out like 1v1 action games, rather than a multiplayer stealth game. I think it'd be a good time for a nice refresh on what the murder genre used to mean. A stealth game that forces the player to stay in the dark, rather than constantly grabbing the spotlight and screaming into the microphone, "I'm over here!" Murder was made to be a game about figuring out who the murderer is, and it all really came down to whether or not the murderer was good at getting away with it. Overall, it'd be nice to see what users and developers are able to come up with. So, what do you think? Do you have any ideas or plans to make a murder game, or do you prefer the action murder genre? Do you agree or disagree with what I said in this video? If you have any comments or suggestions on my future videos, please leave a comment. I may not respond, but I'm always reading. And if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more content. This is the Block Review, and thank you for watching.